Tonight, the future of farming. Is one of Saskatchewan's biggest industries in jeopardy as aging farmers retire? We look at who may fill that gap.
And we have to put in so many acres in a short time.
Also, as we get into spring, we examine how climate change is impacting bird migration patterns.
In the fall, our saw-whet owls that we catch at the Beaverville Bird Observatory are migrating later.
Plus, as the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs gets underway tonight, we meet an Edmonton Oilers fan with a unique way of celebrating his team's games.
This is CBC Saskatchewan News.
It is Monday, April 17th, and the CBC Saskatchewan News starts right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Saskatchewan's agriculture industry has taken a number of blows recently, from rising costs and extreme weather conditions. But farming may be facing a long-term problem, a labor shortage, as fewer people choose to enter the business. A new report suggests we need to look for farmers from outside of Canada. Sam Sampson reports.
This year it was wheat and...
Rehan Khan is no stranger to the farm life. For 2 decades, he farmed and worked in agricultural science in Pakistan. He left it all behind in 2018 to bring his kids to Canada, hoping to start a farm. He owns these 160 acres now, but it wasn't easy.
The startup cost is high, over here. And like for the small farmers, they cannot buy the heavy equipment which are so expensive, you cannot afford them. You have to get some rental.
Canada-wide, the cost of farmland went up more than 20% in 5 years. In many areas, $1 million budget won't buy even a small farm. So some newcomers are frozen out from the get-go.
We get lots of calls of people who are eager to start, but there's that gap there between what they can afford and what they're actually going for.
A recent report shows 40% of Canadian farmers will retire within 10 years. There's also an expected shortage of 24,000 farm, nursery, and greenhouse workers. To fill the gap, researchers say Canada needs 30,000 immigrants who can either start up their own operations or take over existing ones. One solution? Make it easier for experienced temporary foreign workers to become permanent residents.
We're also talking about radically new forms of agriculture, like the explosion of the greenhouse industry over the last, say, 20 years. These are year-round operations. They need a workforce year-round. So the very notion of a temporary migrant worker that comes in simply for the growing season doesn't really even make sense.
There are provinces like Saskatchewan that have programs specifically to attract ag-focused immigrants to the sector. There is also a federal pilot project which speeds up the permanent resident process for farm-focused newcomers, but that ends in May. Stephen Donald is hiring a temporary foreign worker this summer. For the first time in his family farm's history, he can't find local, consistent help.
When the crunch comes on and we have to put in so many acres in a short time, that's when we need the extra help. And that's what makes it difficult.
The report suggests automating machinery so it takes fewer people to get the work done. Donald is already doing that. He's trading this grain cleaner in for one that can run 24/7 without supervision. He's also updated his harvesting tools.
I guess with technology, we've been able to cover more acres with less machinery. But at the same time, to manage an operation properly and doing all your weed scouting and plant timing and seed timing, it still boils down to so many acres per person to manage that.
The report also urges Canadians to create succession plans, since most don't have one. Khan was lucky enough to rent equipment from neighbors down the road. That was just one piece of the puzzle.
Unfortunately, in the very beginning, couldn't find so much information for this thing. But later, now I know everything. Now I know, how to buy something, from where to buy, where would get the less price.
Khan hopes it's easier for future newcomers, especially since he and others are a key part of Canada's farming future. Sam Sampson, CBC News, near Yorkton.
Our spring-like weather was a nice treat over the weekend, but short-lived. Ethan Williams joins me now to explain. Ethan, what is coming?
Well, we got a Colorado low headed our way, Sam, and this time of year, that can mean some pretty messy things. We already have a winter storm watch in effect for Regina, for Assiniboia, Gravelbourg, Weyburn, Estevan, up toward Yorkton, Kamsack, Kenora. That has been upgraded from a significant weather statement that was issued earlier today, or yesterday, I should say. Swift Current, Kindersley, Saskatoon, you were under that advisory, but that has since ended, and that's especially good news for folks in the southwest dealing with some higher water levels. Now, in terms of what this all means, probably tomorrow, later day through to kind of midday Thursday is when we're seeing the highest impacts. 10 to 25 centimeters of snow, a lot of that going to be wet snow probably and melting, but 60 to 80 kilometer an hour winds are going to mean that we're going to be seeing some blowing snow. Travel, especially on Wednesday, not going to be recommended, and with that heavy snow, power outages could be possible, so it's important to have an emergency kit ready to go now, and I'll have more details on the impact of the storm a little bit later, Sam.
All right, thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
So if that snow does come through, farmers say it will be much needed moisture in some areas, but it could also delay seeding. And for beef producers still calving, another brush with winter carries some risk.
Depending on how severe the storm is, there's been cases of casualties during the storm where animals have been covered by snowbanks and suffocated. So, obviously that's not a good situation. And the grain side of things, moisture is good, but it is getting late in the season. Hopefully, if we do get storms, it will clear up fast and we'll get back to drying up the land so we can get on there and start getting seeding.
The latest drought outlook described most of Saskatchewan as abnormally dry. Amnesty International is applauding Saskatchewan's decision to stop holding immigrant detainees in provincial jails as of September 30th. The provincial government signed a deal with Ottawa in 1994 to incarcerate migrants who were detained for administrative reasons. Under the agreement, people would have to be held in jail or some alternative until they were processed. But starting this fall, Saskatchewan will hold only non-Canadian citizens who have criminal charges.
They had the sense of relief at finally arriving in Canada, and that sense of relief was quickly broken when they were thrown into provincial jails without being charged of any crime. They often had no idea why they were there. And a lot of people talk about not having a date of release to count down to.
No, I don't think it would lead to more illegal immigrants. We've seen a number of other provinces move this direction as well. And it's at this point in time that we felt we would essentially do what has been not exclusively across all provinces decision, but very well may be in the future.
The opposition NDP are also on board with the decision. The province says there were 16 individuals in Saskatchewan correctional centres on an immigration hold in 2022. Ottawa says it can transfer detainees to holding centres in other parts of the country. Saskatchewan's Justice Minister is responding to a lawsuit filed against the province. Last week, Onion Lake Cree Nation sued the government over the Saskatchewan First Act. The province says the law reaffirms Saskatchewan's jurisdiction over its natural resources and protects against federal overreach. Onion Lake says the act violates treaty rights and denigrates the treaty relationship. The Minister of Justice disputes that.
The rights themselves, they are enshrined in Section 35, in the Constitution. They are enshrined in the Saskatchewan First Act. They are enshrined in all provincial legislation. So what we're saying when we say that we are constitutionally confident and legally confident about the Saskatchewan First Act, it's because it asserts the language that's already in the Constitution.
AIR says the province has not seen the statement of claim. Opposition leader Carla Beck says the government is facing the lawsuit because it failed to properly consult with Indigenous leadership before introducing the act. More than 155,000 public servants will go on strike Wednesday if their union doesn't reach a deal with the federal government by 9 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night. The head of the Public Service Alliance of Canada made the announcement today and says he is frustrated with the state of negotiations.
Despite some progress at the bargaining table, our members are frustrated that while negotiations drag on, they continue to fall behind.
A strike by workers employed by the Canada Revenue Agency and the Treasury Board would affect many services. Those range from tax returns to passport applications and immigration application processing. The union says it's seeking wages that keep up with the cost of living, as well as better job security and some other changes. It was a big weekend for CBC Saskatchewan. Some of our colleagues were honored at the Canadian Association of Journalists Awards. The awards are for outstanding journalism last year. In the investigative online media category, Jeff Leo won for Disputed History, an ongoing investigation into the ancestry of prominent scholar and former judge Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. Regina-based CBC Indigenous reporter Jennifer Francis won the Emerging Indigenous Journalist Award. And congrats to our friends on Saskatoon Morning on CBC Radio for winning the Community Broadcast category for its storytelling around community support workers in Saskatoon. The pelicans have officially returned to the Meewasin Valley in Saskatoon, and we can get really specific about it. The first pelican to touch down in Meewasin's official splashdown zone between the CPR Bridge and the Weir this year was on Saturday the 15th at 7:56 p.m. A volunteer spotted it as part of the Meewasin Pelican Watch contest. The contest has been running for 27 years. Previous arrival times have varied between April 2nd and 21st. When we come back after the break, we look at how climate change is impacting bird migration patterns. Stay with us. The storm in our forecast will likely be an unwelcome surprise to birds returning from their winter holiday. Bird migration is a given in Canada, but given how is climate change affecting those flights? Meteorologist Christy Kleimenhage has more.
Spring is here, and pretty soon bird watchers are going to be flocking to places like this to catch their favorite species returning. About 3/4 of Canada's birds are migratory, leaving in the winter when it's cooler and then coming back when conditions are just right. But climate change is already starting to mess with those biannual international flights. Our birds that don't have to go too far, like our robins and our ducks, use weather cues or climate cues to return. Things like waiting for the weather to warm up or when the water starts to open up. But as our spring melts push earlier and earlier with climate change, our birds are following suit. In Alberta, our mountain bluebirds are arriving about 19 days earlier than they did about 60 years ago. And our warmer falls mean our birds are leaving later as well.
In the fall, our saw-whet owls that we catch at the Beaverville Bird Observatory are migrating later. So 3 days per 20 years, so 1.5 days per decade later, which doesn't sound like much, but if that keeps multiplying out, it'd be like the bluebirds arriving 3 weeks earlier than they used to.
And for our birds that do have further to go, our warblers and our peregrine falcons who winter in Mexico or South America, they've evolved to use daylight hours to know when to leave and when to come back. But the problem there is that if they're coming back to what they think is an early spring, they may actually be late. In other words, climate change is happening faster than they can evolve. So they adapt, heading further north or higher up mountain slopes to where it's cooler, which may not be the right habitat for them. Now, the good news is that we as humans are fascinated by birds. Thousands of bird watchers provide data every year to scientists that can provide a bigger picture of what's happening on the landscape.
The birds are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine, telling us about climate change and its impact on the environment that could affect things that are more critical, such as insects, soil microbes, things that are a lot harder to monitor.
So keep an eye on our feathered friends. They're a great marker for tracking our changing planet.
This weather update is brought to you by Capital Ford Lincoln. Friend and Family F-150 event is on now.
And our weather specialist, Ethan Williams, joins me now. This is the windiest calm before the storm I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, you go outside and you basically just about blow away. It has indeed been a very windy day, and there's a reason for that. It's because there is actually a separate low pressure system in Alberta ahead of this Colorado low that is going to be moving in. This time of year, we get those kind of warm and cold air masses sort of fighting with each other as we head from spring into summer, and that is what's causing causing all of this really volatile activity. Add in the fact that we don't have a lot of high pressure around, and high pressure kind of acts as a barrier for these systems, and you get a lot of these low pressure systems moving in. And as you can see, this low pressure system in Alberta bringing through some moisture, mostly in the form of rain, to portions of the province, and it's mostly rainfall in Alberta today. But this is where our next system is coming from, this Colorado low, spinning off the Pacific Northwest coast of the U.S. right now. Several surface systems going on, and that is going to trigger off the Colorado low that is going to be moving in our direction. Now, that system in Alberta bringing through some very, very strong winds, almost 100 kilometers an hour in some parts of Alberta today. It hasn't been quite that strong through much of Saskatchewan, but it still has been breezy. In Regina, at times we had gusts close to 60 kilometers an hour. In Prince Albert, we have a gust right now over 70, and those wind gusts are expected to continue through the night tonight. All right, here's a little bit of a play-by-play of how we think this is going to work. This low-pressure system in Alberta eventually going to be diminishing, but bringing through some rain and maybe some mixed precipitation through southern Saskatchewan tonight. The north seeing a bit of mixed precipitation as well. Through tomorrow morning, the first wave of this system begins to move through, and it's mostly snowfall kind of in eastern sections of the province, and in the western half, it's a little bit of rainfall, and then things really get moving as we head through the night, Tuesday into Wednesday. That's when we're going to start to see the system retrograde a little bit and snow moving back through southeastern Saskatchewan. And it keeps moving actually from east to west as that system kind of moves counterclockwise through the day on Wednesday. Now, in terms of snowfall amounts, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Some of this could be tamped down by rain, and it could be wet snow. So we may not see actually as much accumulation as what's predicted here, but could be upwards of 15, 20 centimeters in some places. As if it falls as rain, could be 15 to 20 millimeters in some spots. Again, highest amounts, rain or snow, probably in southeastern Saskatchewan and in higher elevations. And those winds going to be breezy through the night tonight, picking up tomorrow again, especially in the southeast, between 50 and 60 kilometers an hour once again, and then really getting going close to 70 in the winter storm watch area over these next couple of days, especially on Wednesday. And we will have quite an icky 3 days here to deal with, very windy conditions. And then note that those temperatures really going to take a drop back down into the minuses in Regina as we head through the rest of the week. But heading through the weekend and into next week, looks like we see some sunshine and some improvement. Saskatoon, I think it's mostly going to be falling as rain for you, especially Tuesday, Wednesday, a little bit of snowfall, and then things improve. We could see some moisture, more moisture than we saw in the entire month of March in some places with this system, Sam.
Is icky the meteorological term for what we're about to experience?
This is the term that I'm branding for this storm specifically.
The icky one. Okay,
I love it.
Thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
The fight against canker worms in Regina begins today. The city will start banding trees as a pesticide-free, inexpensive way to stop the insects. And each tree that gets banded helps reduce the need to spray later in the season. The city's hoping you'll help them out by banding your own trees, specifically elm, Manitoba maples, and fruit trees. The ban should come off mid-May and will go back on in the fall. You can find more details at regina.ca/pests. We'll be back after the break. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation has stopped posting its news on Twitter for now. It's because of a new label the social media company has slapped on the CBC. As Thomas Daglu explains, it happened days after a tweet by a Canadian politician.
Canada's public broadcaster says it won't be tweeting for now, amid a spat over its funding and editorial independence. At issue is Twitter's move to tag CBC's corporate page as government-funded media, a label demanded by the leader of the opposition when Pierre Poilievre told Twitter's owner, Elon Musk, Canadians need to be protected against disinformation and manipulation by state media.
The fact that he has to run to American billionaires for support to attack Canadians says a lot about Mr. Poilievre and his values.
The news continues here, of course, on BBC One.
Twitter recently started applying similar labels to broadcasters like Britain's BBC and U.S. National Public Radio. BBC fought the move and got its label changed to publicly funded. According to Twitter's own definition, when an outlet is tagged government-funded, it means there may be varying degrees of government involvement over editorial content. Just the type of perception that media outlets want to avoid, says this former editor.
News organizations that are funded in that way need to have a very firm arm's length relationship and be able to say we are independent and we are trusted.
Through a parliamentary appropriation, CBC and the French-language Radio-Canada receive more than $1 billion a year in public funding. But the Broadcasting Act states the corporation remains editorially independent of the government.
CBC has no track record being a propaganda to Canadian government in any time of the history.
The Crown Corporation insists its journalism is impartial. CBC says it reached out to Twitter and will pause its use of the platform to share news with its audience. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
10 months after the federal government froze funding for Hockey Canada, the money is flowing again. The government says the governing body will tackle problems regarding safety, sexual violence, and the culture of silence. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he's confident change will happen and that the government will monitor the progress.
We put extremely clear expectations before Hockey Canada, before we would restore funding to them. They have indicated a real willingness to move forward on that, but we are going to continue to be extremely vigilant.
Ottawa withdrew funding last June after it was revealed the organization used registration fees to settle cases of alleged sexual assault. Since then, Hockey Canada's board of directors has been replaced and its governance has been overhauled. Hockey Canada received almost $8 million from the government in the 2022 fiscal year. Government funding makes up about 7% of the organization's overall revenue. And Ethan is back with one last look at your weather.
Oh, you say that like it's such a bad thing, Sam. Well, you're going to get blown around a little bit if you're in Regina and southern Saskatchewan tonight. At midnight, 6 degrees again. Those southeast winds still close to 50 kilometers an hour. Partly cloudy, but then cloud cover builds in as we head through the morning, and we could have either snow or rain by the time we hit the morning. At 8 a.m., we'll be right at the freezing mark. Winds still gusty, and those are only going to keep picking up as we head through the afternoon. Close to 50 once again. Likely wet snow before we get to the noon hour or so. Saskatoon again, partly cloudy. Winds not as bad for you through the night tonight, and temperatures won't be dipping quite as low, and it'll just mostly be rainfall for you as we head through the morning tomorrow, and then still rain as we head through the afternoon. So all in all, not very great and still messy, Sam.
All right, thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
And before we leave you tonight, fans are celebrating across the country with the start of the NHL playoffs tonight. One Edmonton Oilers fan in Manitoba celebrates every single Oilers game, win or lose, by drawing a post-game cartoon. Every single game. It's led to more than 1,000 drawings.
I'm Lance Maxwell, and I draw the Edmonton Oilers post-game cartoons. I'm a huge fan of the Edmonton Oilers, and I like my 2 cents to be shared with all that are out there. I call them post-game cartoons, so I make them right after the game generally. So the West Coast trips are hard to take because it's usually 1 or 2 in the morning by the time I've completed. Yeah, I've missed 1 game in 6 years. It's my perspective on the game is what's being shared through my pen. It's the little things that a lot of people don't see, but they will notice them once they see my drawings. Connor McDavid, he's always throwing some nice highlights out there for us. So there was the one where he beat out the 4 Rangers and went and scored. That was a good one. Nugent Hopkins, the one where he fought Paul from Toronto there. It's got him showing off his belt and everyone's chanting Rocky in the background. Some people collect stamps, some people collect coins. I collect cartoons. My goal was to finish it when they win the Stanley Cup. So that would be probably the end of my story. I think there's one point there when the Omicron started kicking butt there that I was almost done because the Oilers hadn't won a game in hardly at all in the December of that year. And it almost ended then, but I just couldn't stay away from it. It's kind of become an addiction.
We'll see how it ends up for him. That is it for us tonight. For News Anytime, you can always head to our website or subscribe to CBC Saskatchewan's YouTube channel. We're back tomorrow at 5. Ethan's back tonight at 11:30. Up next, it's Game 1 of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs between Boston and Florida. Enjoy the game.